Hi there, I'm Todd Miller, 7-8 culinary arts teacher with Lakehead Public Schools. I've got another recipe for you to try today, but before we start, a few reminders. First off, if you're unsure about any of the equipment that you're going to be using, make sure you ask someone that has some more kitchen experience, especially when you're working around the stove, oven, and even the microwave. Make sure you understand how they work, and always have a pair of oven mitts handy, even for the microwave. Some of the equipment gets hot in there. If the recipe calls for the use of a knife, make sure that you're really comfortable using a sharp knife like this. Again, ask somebody that has some experience and practice first before using it for your recipe. Always hold the knife with a lot of conviction in one hand, and with your other hand, you want to make sure that you keep your hand in that claw position, kind of like you're holding a tennis ball. Always keep your hand curled back so that the knife doesn't come in contact with your fingertips. Before you start the recipe, make sure you watch the entire video, read the recipe entirely through, make sure you understand everything, and of course, get all of your equipment and your ingredients out first. It makes the recipe go a lot more smoothly. And finally, don't forget, you made the mess, you're in charge of cleaning up. Don't leave a dirty kitchen for someone else. So have a great time cooking. Today we're going to tackle tacos. Now, tacos are pretty straightforward, pretty easy to make. All you need really is some ground beef, taco seasoning mix, a little bit of water, and some taco shells, either soft or hard kind. But we're gonna make it a little bit more complicated, make it a little more challenging, and make it a little more delicious, I think, by doing a couple of things different. First off, we're not going to use this. This costs almost $2. We can make our own taco seasoning for less than 20 cents, and that way we make it exactly the way we want. And as well, we're also going to make our own tortillas as well too. So we're going to do both of those things. So I'm going to start off right away. We've got to cook the ground beef up. So the ground beef is already on a pan. I'm making sure I'm not touching it now, because if I touch that with my hands and touch anything else, I've got cross-contamination. The bacteria and other things that are on the meat could then get onto other surfaces. So I want to be really careful that I don't touch anything else. So I'm going to slip this right into my pan that's already hot, so it's going to sizzle a little bit. And I want to use a spoon, spatula, some kind of container to start breaking up that ground beef a little bit. All meats have to be cooked to certain temperatures. Ground beef has to be cooked at 74 degrees Celsius, and an easy way to do that is to cook it until there's no pink whatsoever. So spread that out, and we'll let that cook for a little bit until we get rid of the pink. While that's happening, like I said, we're going to make up our own taco seasoning. So this is really easy to do at home, and if you don't have one or two of these ingredients, for the most part, don't panic. And the nice thing is once you've made it one way, if there's things that you like more, you can add a little bit more, or if you don't like them, add a little bit less. So we're going to start off with some chili powder. That's kind of a necessity. You really kind of have to have chili powder in there. And we need 1 tablespoon of that. And then we're going to be using 2 kinds of powders, onion powder and garlic powder. We're going to use a 1/4 teaspoon of each, so not very much. So a little bit first of our onion powder, and a little bit of our garlic powder. If you don't have garlic powder, you want to use a little chopped up garlic, you can do that. Red pepper flakes, these are kind of spicy, so I'm just going to use just under a 1/4 teaspoon of those. In my house, people don't like them too hot. And then we're going to use some cumin as well, which is used in lots of different types of cooking. We're going to use quite a bit of that. We're going to use 1.5 teaspoons. So I got 1 teaspoon, and I'll use my 1/2 teaspoon for a full 1.5 teaspoons. There we go. And then finally we have some salt and pepper. Now, my recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of each, but if you don't like it very salty, if you're worried about too much salt in your diet, you can use a little bit less if you like. And the same with the pepper. If you don't like it very peppery, use a little bit less. If you really like it peppery, use a little bit more. So there's no magic, or there's no secret to making taco seasoning. It's just certain kinds of spices that we mix together, and many of those we already have at home. And we're avoiding things like hydrogenated soybean oil, silicon dioxide, sunflower and cottonseed oil, which must be dried because it's dried in here, yellow corn flour. So there's some things in here that we really don't need in our seasoning mix. So be ready to add that in a bit, but we'll give this a bit of a stir first. And again, we see it starting to change color on the bottom, so we want to stir it so that the top changes color as well, and we get rid of all of that pink. Now, depending on what kind of ground beef you buy, you might end up with quite a bit of leftover fat or grease at the bottom of the pan. This is lean ground beef, so I'll probably just have a little bit. We want to get rid of that, or else it does make our final product too greasy. So we have to make sure that we do that as well after. So continue to let that cook. So now I've got my seasoning mix. I just give that a stir with a fork, just to make sure everything's mixed up well, and then we're just going to put it aside. We'll be adding that a little bit later on, along with some water. So that's for our taco filling. Now we're going to talk about the tortillas. Some people like the hard shell tortillas like that. In Canada, people often prefer the soft flour tortillas. In the United States and Mexico, they usually use more corn shells, which aren't as common in Canada. We use flour ones a lot. We can make our own flour ones at home, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to make flour ones. So for that, all you need is a bowl, and we're going to start off with 2 cups of flour. So measuring flour, I scoop it in gently, then use a knife to scrape off any extra. This makes enough for 6 tortilla shells. So you can divide the recipe in half for half as many, or you can double the recipe to make 12. And to that, we're going to add just a couple other things to give it some flavor and to help make them a little softer. First, we're going to use some baking powder. We're going to use 1 teaspoon of baking powder. That's going to make them rise up a little bit. And we're also going to use half a teaspoon of salt. So those 3 things are just going to be mixed together with a fork or a whisk, just to make sure that the salt and the baking powder gets mixed in with the flour. Now we need some fat to hold it together and also to give it some flavor. In this case, we're going to use something called lard. So lard comes from the fat of animals. Shortening is another kind. That comes from fat from plant. It's plant-based. So depending on your diet at home, you might want to use one or the other. Lard is a little bit better, but shortening will work as well. So lard looks like this. It's kind of greasy, which makes sense because it's a fat. And we're using 1 tablespoon. Now with this, we want to break it off into little pieces, and then we're going to mix it in, almost like playing in the sandbox. A couple different things we can use. You can use your fork to mix it in. You can use your fingers as well, or if you have a pastry blender, that works really well. I'm going to start off with the pastry blender, but I'll probably end up just using my fingers. So pastry blender looks like this. It's got some little ridges on it, so that when I put it in the flour, give it a little bit of twist, it breaks up the fat from the lard and mixes it in a little bit with the flour. So I start off by doing that. And we're looking for sort of a rough, sandy consistency. Little bits of lard mixed in with the flour. Again, that'll help to give it some flavor. More importantly, it'll also help for it all to stick together as well, too. I'll give my meat another stir here. Start to lose a lot of that pink color. And I hardly have any fat today with this. I'll still have a little tiny bit to drain off, but not very much. So we're almost ready to add that. I'm also being careful not to use my hands to touch the meat, because A, it's hot. Be very careful on the stove top, but also don't want any cross-contamination because some of this meat's not cooked yet. So give that a few more minutes. I'm also using my wooden spoon to break it up as well too. With tacos, you want smaller pieces of meat. So we want to break up these chunks into small pieces. Okay, a little bit more for that, so I'll go back to this. Now I'm just going to get my fingers right in there and smush up. I can feel the little pieces of lard in there, so I want to smush that up with my fingers. Here I don't have to worry about cross-contamination. There is no bacteria in the flour that I need to really worry about, and there isn't any in the lard as well too. Still don't want to touch a lot of stuff. So I've got that all mixed in, and then the last thing we have to add in is some water. But I've done a lot of reading about this, and it seems that tortillas work out the best if the water is hot. I'm not quite sure why, but we want to start off with some hot water. So I've got some water that I previously boiled. I'm going to add a little bit of that water. I've got 3/4 of a cup of water, so I'm going to add about a 1/4 cup at a time, and then start to stir. Just to start to mix in that water. If I added it all at once, it would be too difficult to stir. If I don't add enough at a time, it's just going to stay way too dry. So I add another little bit after I've stirred a little bit. I can see it starting to come together now. This is a very simple dough, very easy to use, and we're just going to cook these right up in a fry pan afterwards. And one more addition. And sometimes you might not end up adding quite all of the water. You just want to add enough water so that your dough all comes together. If it comes together before you add all of the water, that's absolutely fine. I still have, most of my dough has come together here, but I still have a little bit of water, flour at the bottom yet, so I'm going to add a little bit more of that water right to the bottom to get that all mixed in, and then we'll go on to the next part with that. The tortillas, even though I'm making them at the same time, I would have done this part in advance, because there is one thing that makes them even better, and that's if the dough gets to sit for a while after. So I'll leave that for a sec, because it looks like my ground beef, I don't see any pink anywhere in it now. It's all broken down into smaller pieces, and I actually don't have any fat to drain either. There's no fat in there at all today, so that nice lean ground beef I was using, if there was any fat in there, I would take a container like this and very carefully, perhaps with somebody to help me if need be, I would pour any fat into that container. The last thing you want to do is to pour that fat down the sink. That'll stick together in your sink and it could cause you lots of plumbing problems. So, I've got my spices. I'm just going to sprinkle all those on top. That out of the way. Mix the spices in to toast them a little bit. That actually, the frying of the spices actually gives it even more flavor. So we want to toast that up a bit. Excellent smells coming out of there. And then we want to add some water too. It's quite dry right now, so we're adding half a cup of water. Some people add a little bit more if you want it a little runnier, or a little bit less if you want it drier. The great thing about cooking on the stove top is, unlike when you're baking, you've got a little bit of flexibility. You can make things the way you want. I want to make sure that all of the meat has a bit of spice to it. And then I'm going to just turn that right down now. And just let that simmer away for about 5 minutes or so. And then that's it. The filling is completely done. So I'll get back to my dough here. My dough has all come together. And now I need to knead it. Kneading with a K at the front. So I've got a nice dough here, but it's all kind of shaggy and it's kind of a rough dough. So we're going to smooth it out a little bit. So I'm going to knead it on the countertop. I'm going to use just a very light dusting of flour. I already have some good flour on my hand, so I don't need too much to do that. And now I'm going to use the heel of my hand, form the dough into a ball, and then push down on the dough. Pushing down on it and then rolling it towards me. And just like in a circular motion like that. This will help to smooth out the dough. What we're doing actually is stretching these little proteins inside the flour called gluten, and that gives us a nice smooth dough. I can incorporate some of the flour that's on the surface if I need to, and I just keep pushing this around. I would knead for anywhere from 1 to 2 minutes until the outside of the dough is nice and smooth. And this is coming together really well. You want to give it quite a bit of pressure with your hands, kind of like working with plasticine when you're back in kindergarten. And already my dough is coming together quite nicely. You can see how much it's changed now. It's not nearly as shaggy. It's forming much nicer into a ball. And I think we're almost done. So what I would do now is I would use a knife carefully on the countertop, perhaps with a cutting board underneath, to divide this into 6 pieces, roll each into a ball, and then, like I say, best to make these a little bit beforehand. It's great if they get a chance to sit for a while first, about half an hour. When they're sitting, it's good for them to be underneath a wet piece of paper towel so they don't dry out. So I've got some here that I made earlier. I made a half batch, so I have 3 of them. And then all we have to do is flatten these out and then cook them in a hot fry pan. I've got a fry pan that I'm already heating up here. They take hardly any time at all to cook. Now to flatten them out, you can use a rolling pin like that to flatten them out, which is what most of us have at home. But if you happen to have one of these, or if you really get into making tortillas, you might want to use one of these. These are what are commonly used in Mexico, and it's a tortilla press. It's made of cast iron, so it's very, very heavy. Just open it up. We've got a couple pieces of parchment paper, or wax paper, or plastic wrap, even the plastic from the outside of the milk bag, not the milk bag itself, but the bag that it comes in. Something just to keep the dough from sticking to the tortilla press itself. So we just put that in there, push down, push on the lever, give it a good squeeze, and that'll flatten out our dough. Now we don't want to do that just one time. We want to do it once, then rotate it 180 degrees, and then flatten again. And it's best if you can do this about 4 or a half dozen times. You're stretching out the dough, less of a chance of it rebounding the more that you do it. So again, you can easily use a rolling pin for this as well, but if you've got one of these, or if you see one at the store, they're a lot of fun to use. One more time. There we go. So I've got a very hot fry pan here. No oil or butter or anything in the bottom of it. We're frying them dry. Here's it all flattened out. And the important thing is as soon as you take it off there, it's going to start to shrink back. So as soon as you flatten it, you want to put it in your fry pan right away. You don't want to start to squeeze out your next dough until this one's cooked. If you leave it stretched out, it's going to start to shrink back in, and you're going to end up with a tortilla about this big. We want them a little bit bigger than that. They don't take very long at all. After about 30 seconds or so, we can already see they're starting to brown on one side. They cook really quickly. Turn them over again. And while that's cooking, we can take a look here, and we can see that the water has all been absorbed, but it's put a lot of moisture into our ground beef. I can see little flecks of red peppers in there. I can smell the cumin and the chili powder and the onion powder and garlic powder. So this is completely ready to go. Give that one more turn. It should be nice and blackened, starting to brown on there. Give it one more turn on the other side. You don't have to, but I just want to warm it up a little bit. And then you're all set. Of course, for your toppings, that's totally up to you. Cheese is a common one. Salsa, of course, you can make your own salsa at home. Guacamole. But then you get into things like onions and peppers and tomatoes, olives, all sorts of things that you can use. Sky's kind of the limit when it comes to the inside of our tacos. So I got a nice homemade warm tortilla shell, and we just take some of our filling, which we made ourselves. And then, like I said, sky's the limit when it comes to the toppings that you want to add on there. So you can do it as simple as just some ground beef, a package of seasoning, and some store-bought shells, whether they're the hard ones or the soft flour ones. Or you can really go to town, make your own seasoning mix exactly the way you want, make your own tortillas, and you'll have some great homemade tacos, even if it's not Tuesday. So enjoy making tacos and happy cooking.